Hi, my name's Tommy Rowe of Rowe Films, and here is the behind the scenes showing the making of the stage. The concept for the stage came about through discussions between myself and the guys at LUMIX UK. We all felt it would be really great to produce something really dynamic for this one. I also wanted to create something that almost has a movie trailer-like feel to it, but also combine that with elements of documentary filmmaking as well. When I was pitching ideas, I mentioned that there had actually been one recent feature film release that I'd found myself massively inspired by from a cinematography perspective, and that film was The Batman. After I saw the movie, I watched many hours of behind the scenes content and interviews with the director, Matt Reeves, and all of the rest of the production crew. So much of their approach to the photography was really unique: texture, visual grit, and beautiful imperfections. They're all descriptions I found really interesting, and I loved how stylized it was. So I thought it would be really nice to try and incorporate some of these elements into the piece, but do it in our own way. I got in touch with my friend, the UK rock musician Chris Barris. I've worked with him and his band, the Chris Barris Band, a fair bit over the last few years. But Chris's story is a very interesting one because he went from being a professional MMA fighter to a rock musician. They're awesome, by the way, you should definitely check them out. That journey from the cage to the stage is a really interesting one, with lots of parallels to be drawn between what is ultimately two forms of art, music and mixed martial arts. Both are a stage to perform on, if you like. Incorporating this idea with the Batman inspiration, of course it was a fine line. We wanted to take some inspiration in terms of the visuals rather than the subject matter. Because as far as I'm aware, Chris isn't a billionaire by day and a masked vigilante by night. Maybe he is, I don't know, but it'd be news to me. Everyone involved liked the idea, so with no time to waste, we cracked straight on with production. I wanted to capture some footage of Chris in his kind of natural habitat, if you like. I got in contact with Josiah Manning of Momentum Studios in Devon, who is actually the other guitarist in the Chris Barris Band and a good friend of Chris's. So I really wanted to capture some footage of Chris doing his thing. As we were taking quite a stylised approach to the piece, there was room to go kind of all out on lighting and haze. I was also able to experiment with different colours. Colour is often used in film to trigger certain emotions. Different colours, of course, have different associations, and I felt the red worked really well here too. For me, it added a bit of an element of aggression. With the red light, it's looking really cool. A little walk in. What's that? Walk on the beach thing, isn't it? Yeah. For the camera setup, I went handheld for these scenes. I also decided to use a V-mount battery to power the rig. When there's time and space to rig things up a little bit, I always like to do so because it can save you a lot of time during the shoot, allowing you to just get on with the job. Lenses wise, I opted to make use of my vintage spherical lenses. I used the old Soviet Helios 44M, as well as a couple of vintage FD lenses. I do believe a rehoused Helios was also used in the car chase scene in the Batman, due to the interesting way it renders images, so that was a good choice, I think.
I feel like I'm shooting the video again.
The general approach to composing these shots was to get a nice bit of variety to use in post. I wanted to use reflections, shoot through things to dirty up the frame, and use foreground elements to get some interesting effects. Just things like holding a symbol up against the lens created some really cool glass-like elements in the frame. I didn't use any assets or overlays in post anywhere in this piece, so everything you see in the film was captured in camera. Once we had finished at the studio, we decided to take a quick trip down the road to the Tamar Bridge in Plymouth. Sean knew a great spot where you can get right underneath the bridges. As soon as we came down the hill, I could see that we kind of struck gold with the conditions. What was a nice surprise was the old school sodium vapour streetlights still in place down there. The old lamps give you that classic urban feel that we're so used to seeing in cinema. For these scenes I actually got the gimbal out, as I wanted to get some nice smooth tracking shots. We found some great compositions with nice lead-in lines, In fact, as soon as I captured these shots, I was pretty sure that the piece would likely open up with one of them. The footage had a nice urban, industrial look to it, which fitted the theme well and was exactly what I was looking for. Next up, it was time to get some fight footage. When I arrived at the location, it was the first time I'd actually seen the space for myself. It was immediately apparent that it was basically like a giant white box with a lot of large windows. Fantastic for MMA training, maybe not quite so good for creating dark and moody cinematography. The first challenge was really to control the light in a way that would allow us to create the kind of look that we needed. To shape light, you can either take it away or add it in. Very often it's a combination of both. So the first job was to try and block out or at least reduce the amount of daylight that was pouring in from the windows, and we realised that we didn't have enough flag material with us to cover them all. At times like these, you just have to make do and improvise, so bin bags came to the rescue. Not perfect, but they did the job. I might actually have to add them to my kit list. I recommend you get the extra thick ones. Once again, I opted for a strong backlight, plenty of haze to keep directional light kind of away from the nearest walls, which would then just bounce the light everywhere and fill the entire scene. After a bit of playing around and some experimentation, we managed to set up some angles that worked really well. I was going for a similar look to what we had shot in the studio scenes, so they were cut together nicely. Again, the idea here was to hint at the parallels between the two arts, so there needed to be some continuity in the look. Setup wise for these shots, I went for the smallest and most nimble setup I could. Pretty much just the caged GH6 and the Ninja. I knew that these shots would be doing much of the heavy lifting in terms of the energy in the edit, so I wanted to be able to throw the camera around a little bit. These were also the first scenes where the anamorphic lenses were available to me. I do think they added a lot here. I'm really impressed by the Sirui Mars lens set, which consists of a 24mm, 35, 50 and 75, all with a micro four thirds mount. The lenses give you that classic anamorphic look with the blue horizontal flares and things, but it's definitely not overkill. The flares are present when you want them, but they're also easily controlled. Both the GH6 and Ninja have really good anamorphic functions. Both units have an option specifically for a 0.33 times squeeze factor, so monitoring with a breeze. The GH6 also has an IBIS setting specifically for anamorphic shooting too, so that lens flare stays horizontal. So I was able to shoot handheld with IBIS on, which was awesome. One of the shots I really wanted for this piece, and probably the furthest I'd go in terms of Batman inspiration, was a sunset shot of Chris in an urban environment. The rooftop sunset is a pretty iconic shot from that movie, and I'm not going to lie, I really wanted my own version. I framed up a close-up of him from the back and focused on the background, throwing him out of focus. I really do love this look. For me, this scene was all about kind of contemplation, with Chris having crossed that bridge, so to speak, between MMA and music. I was also able to make use of the full set of the 4 anamorphic lenses here. The 75 really is very tight on a micro four thirds camera, but I love the way it compresses the background relative to the distance from the subject, making the bridge look absolutely huge and imposing here. I needed to capture some B-roll of Chris out and about in a kind of urban environment. To really push the low light performance, I wanted to shoot it at night. For the driving shots, we decided shooting from the back of Sean's van could actually work really well. Instead of cleaning the window first though, we intentionally left it a bit dirty. It's all about adding a bit of gritty texture to the images. His window actually had a fairly heavy tint on it, which acted just like ND. This really is testament to the setup though. Despite that, and shooting at night, I was still able to get a good exposure and the images came out nice and clean. I then rode shotgun with Chris and captured some shots from inside the car. These were great for getting the nice ovals and the flares that we associate with anamorphic glass. Finally, it was time to capture some dialogue to give us the documentary element of the piece. We found a good spot with a view of the bridge. Chris talked a bit about his journey, which he's naturally very good at thanks to doing so many media interviews over the years. And I also got him to read some lyrics from his last album that fitted the theme. These lyrics would give the piece some weight and that movie trailer-like feel. It was getting a bit dark at this point, but the kit handled it perfectly. Capturing dialogue in a city environment like this can be pretty tricky.
Sorry, put it in shot, like put it... Right there, so go back a bit there.
Cars, trains, sirens, you name it, we had it all.
That's Batman.
So I used a shotgun mic, which did a really great job of isolating Chris's voice from all the background noise.
When my head's in songwriting mode, I can just be anywhere. I can be walking down the street. An idea will pop into my head and I end up jotting it down.
So much so I ended up actually adding some cityscape sound back in post. The recording settings I used in this piece were all ProRes RAW, of course. I used 5.7K at 24 and 60 frames per second, which gave me a nice amount of resolution to play with for a 4K delivery. I also used 4K 120, which gave me the ability to slow things down to 20% in post. I actually decided to use the standard 17:9 modes, rather than the anamorphic open gate modes that the GH6 and Ninja combo gives you. That would have been the better option for maximising resolution, but I wanted that wide 2.4:1 look. As these lenses only have a 0.33 times squeeze factor, shooting 4:3 open gate would give me a 16:9 frame after the D-squeeze, but shooting 17:9 instead gives me just slightly more than a 2.4:1 image de-squeezed. And it was only a tiny crop on the sides to get to where I wanted to be. Had we been using lenses with a larger squeeze factor, I definitely would have used the open gate modes instead. White balance I was setting manually, although this was purely for monitoring purposes, as it doesn't really matter what you set it to when you're shooting in ProRes RAW, but more on that in a moment. Monitoring, I like to use all of the tools available to me. I use the waveform constantly, and also like to dive across to false color now and then, just if I want a more kind of visual representation of where all my exposure values are sitting. Focus peaking is a must when you're focusing manually. Many of these tools, by the way, are also built into the GH6 itself, which is another huge benefit of this camera. The fact that it has proper monitoring tools built in. Setting exposure is a whole other subject in its own right, and very much depends on the scene in front of you. But my general kind of approach to it is always to get a nice high exposure to pull shadows up out of the noise floor and retain as much information there in the image as possible. I'd always rather bring levels down in post than have to bring an underexposed image up. Of course, I always look to balance that with protecting highlights from clipping in order to retain highlight information and a nice smooth roll off. Dynamic range boost mode I had switched on in all of the shots where it was available. I've been informed boost mode does still do its thing when outputting RAW over HDMI, and to my eyes it appeared to do so. Shooting with this mode on gave me additional dynamic range and also resulted in a super clean, rich image with amazing colour depth. It did mean that my minimum ISO when shooting was 2000. This ended up being perfect in the low light scenes, but meant I needed some pretty strong ND in daylight. I was using a 6 to 9 stop variable ND filter, and that was enough. And of course, shooting in a RAW codec, provided you haven't completely blown your highlights, you can bring the ISO and exposure down in post. The ProRes RAW workflow really is so straightforward. When you import a clip, it automatically defaults to adding both a RAW to log conversion and then the Panasonic Vlog to Rec 709 conversion for you. From there, you're basically good to go. You can swap out the log conversion as well to a custom one if you want to, but I found the stock conversion here worked just fine for me. One of the nice things about ProRes RAW is how unbelievably nice it is to work with. There was no need for proxies or for optimizing the footage before you can start editing it. For me, one of the biggest benefits of shooting in ProRes RAW is the ability to completely shift the white balance in post. Not only does it mean there's one less thing to have to think about on the shoot, but combined with Lumix's amazing color, you can push the footage from one end of the Kelvin spectrum to the other in post, and it holds up perfectly. As demonstrated here, there is no change to the lighting setup or the color grade. The difference in the look simply comes down to shifting the white balance in post. So for me, it's more than just a functional thing. It can also be used as a creative tool too, which is awesome. Noise reduction is a very common part of a RAW workflow. Same goes for things like sharpness. But personally, I actually see this as a benefit. When it comes to things like noise reduction and sharpness, sometimes I actually want to decide when it is applied to what and how much. So for me, this is another benefit to be utilised when you need it. There were only a handful of shots in the entire piece where I applied a small amount of noise reduction. With my kind of style of filmmaking, the looks that I like, I actually quite like there to be a little bit of texture in there. This piece was a perfect example because it was always going to be gritty and grainy, and I'd be adding in some film grain over the top anyway. And that actually brings me on to one of the things that I like the most about the GH6. It's seriously impressive how well Lumix have managed to suppress digital looking chroma noise in the GH6. To me, the noise actually looks quite filmic in nature. The edit was all about creating a nice balance between a movie trailer-like dramatic feel and the documentary elements. Parts of the edit were very fast-paced, and I used things like speed ramping and in-camera transitions to give it energy and movement. Some of the hits are timed with the music as well, which does a lot to tie the sequences together and give it extra impact. I wanted the film to have loads of drama, and another big part of achieving that was in sound design. What people feel from a video or film is as much about what they hear as what they see. So quite a lot of sound design work went into this one. I used lots of different effects such as filters, delays and reverbs, pulled in some Foley sound to create atmosphere, and assets like risers and hits to make it really hit hard. Here's a little sequence from the film with the music stripped out, so you can more easily pick out some of the things that are going on in there.
Contaminate our lifestyles, turn the lights out, keep us in the dark before we make a sound. We are the ammunition. Load us up, fire away. I'm not asking for permission to keep on marching through the rain. I'm on another level, a deal with the devil. He'll take what's his and look after his own. We're heading into battle. The truth will unravel. There ain't no room for two kings on a throne.
Using audio effects like this can really add a lot to your edit. I'm really happy with how this short film came out. I think we managed to achieve everything we kind of set out to achieve, and it was a great test for the GH6 Ninja combination, as well as ProRes RAW. I'm happy to say that all of the kit very much got the job done. I think what I like about them the most is not only are they incredibly powerful tools when combined, but everything you need from a practical perspective is right there at your fingertips. At the same time, they're so versatile and genuinely a fantastic setup for creating a piece like The Stage. So guys, thank you for watching this far, and I hope you found this rundown of the project interesting and in some way useful. If you do have any questions, then please feel free to post in the comments. Once again, a final massive thanks to everyone involved in this project. Thanks to Lumix and Atomos, and finally, a massive thanks to you for watching. Cheers.
MMA, like coming up with game plans, and there's so many different things you can do in mixed martial arts. I always enjoyed coming up with those kind of game plans.